Hello everyone, my name is Anushka Saxena and in this video we are going to continue reading life processes, that is chapter 6 of biology, that is science, class 10th. So we will continue with reading respiration. Respiration. Activity 6.4. Take some freshly prepared lime water in a test tube. Blow air through this lime water. Note how long it takes for the lime water to turn milky. Use a syringe or pitchkari to pass air through some fresh lime water taken in another test tube. Note how long it takes for this lime water to turn milky. What does this tell about the amount of carbon dioxide in the air that we breathe out? Activity 6.5. Take some fruit juice or sugar solution and add some yeast to it. Take this mixture in a test tube fitted with a one-holed cork. Fit the cork with a bent glass tube. Dip the free end of the glass tube into a test tube containing freshly prepared lime water. What change is observed in the lime water and how long does it take for this change to occur? What does this tell about the products of fermentation? We have discussed nutrition in organisms in the last section and we have discussed it in the last video. The food material taken in during the process of nutrition is used in cells to provide energy for various life processes. Diverse organisms do this in different ways. Some use oxygen to break down glucose completely into carbon dioxide and water. Some use other pathways that do not involve oxygen. In all cases, the first step is the breakdown of glucose, a 6-carbon molecule, into a 3-carbon molecule called pyruvate. This process takes place in the cytoplasm. Additional knowledge, this process is known as glycolysis. It is made from glyco, which means glycogen or glucose, and lysis means breaking down. So here glucose is getting broken into pyruvate, which is a 3-carbon molecule. That is why it is known as glycolysis. Now further, the pyruvate may be converted into ethanol and carbon dioxide. This process takes place in yeast during fermentation. Since this process takes place in the absence of air, oxygen, it is called anaerobic respiration or anaerobic respiration. Sorry for my pronunciation. Breakdown of pyruvate using oxygen takes place in the mitochondria. This process breaks up the 3-carbon pyruvate molecule to give 3 molecules of carbon dioxide. The other product is water. Since this process takes place in the presence of air, oxygen, it is called aerobic respiration. The release of energy in this aerobic process is a lot greater than in the anaerobic process. Sometimes, when there is a lack of oxygen in our muscles, another pathway for the breakdown of pyruvate is taken. Here, the pyruvate is converted into lactic acid, which is also a 3-carbon molecule. This buildup of lactic acid in our muscles during sudden activity causes cramps. The energy released during cellular respiration is immediately used to synthesize a molecule called ATP. Full form of ATP is adenosine triphosphate, which is used to fuel all other activities in the cell. In these processes, ATP is broken down, giving rise to a fixed amount of energy which can drive the endothermic reactions taking place in the cell. More to know. ATP. ATP is the energy currency for most cellular processes. The energy released during the process of respiration is used to make an ATP molecule from ADP and inorganic phosphate. Full form of ADP is adenosine diphosphate. Endothermic processes in the cell then use this ATP to drive the reactions. When the terminal phosphate linkage in ATP is broken using water, the energy equivalent to 30.5 kJ per mole is released. Think of how a battery can provide energy for many different kinds of uses. It can be used to obtain mechanical energy, light energy, electrical energy, and so on. Similarly, ATP can be used in the cells for the contraction of muscles, protein synthesis, conduction of nervous impulses, and many other activities. Since the aerobic respiration pathway depends on oxygen, aerobic organisms need to ensure that there is a sufficient intake of oxygen. We have seen that plants exchange gases through stomata, and the large intercellular spaces ensure that all cells are in contact with air. Carbon dioxide and oxygen are exchanged by diffusion here. They can go into cells or away from them and out into the air. The direction of diffusion depends upon the environmental conditions and the requirements of the plant. At night, when there is no photosynthesis occurring, CO2 elimination is the major exchange activity going on. During the day, CO2 generated during respiration is used up for photosynthesis. Hence, there is no CO2 release. Instead, oxygen release is the major event at this time. Animals have evolved different organs for the uptake of oxygen from the environment and for getting rid of the carbon dioxide produced. Terrestrial animals can breathe the oxygen in the atmosphere, but animals that live in water need to use the oxygen dissolved in water. Activity 6.6. Observe fish in an aquarium. They open and close their mouths, and the gill slits or the operculum, which covers the gill slits behind their eyes, also open and close. Are the timings of the opening and closing of the mouth and gill slits coordinate in some manner? Count the number of times the fish opens and closes its mouth in a minute. Compare this to the number of times you breathe in and out in a minute. Since the amount of dissolved oxygen is fairly low compared to the amount of oxygen in the air, the rate of breathing in aquatic organisms is much faster than that seen in terrestrial organisms. Fishes take in water through their mouths and force it past the gills, where the dissolved oxygen is taken up by blood. Terrestrial organisms use the oxygen in the atmosphere for respiration. This oxygen is absorbed by different organs in different animals. All these organs have a structure that increases the surface area which is in contact with the oxygen-rich atmosphere. Since the exchange of oxygen and carbon dioxide has to take place across this surface is very fine and delicate. In order to protect this surface, it is usually placed within the body, so there have to be passages that will take air to this area. In addition, there is a mechanism of moving the air in and out of this area where the oxygen is absorbed. In human beings, air is taken into the body through the nostrils. The air passing through the nostrils is filtered by fine hairs that line the passage. The passage is also lined with mucus, which helps in this process. From here, the air passes through the throat and into the lungs. Rings of cartilage are present in the throat. Additional knowledge: these rings are C-shaped, and these ensure that the air passage does not collapse. This is the diagram. Within the lungs, the passage divides into smaller and smaller tubes, which finally terminate into balloon-like structures, which are called alveoli. The alveoli provide a surface where the exchange of gases can take place. The walls of the alveoli contain an extensive network of blood vessels. That is, they are highly vascularized. As we have seen in earlier years, when we breathe in, we lift our ribs and flatten our diaphragm, and the chest cavity becomes larger as a result. Because of this, air is sucked into the lungs and fills the expanded alveoli. This is because when the thoracic cavity increases, the pressure inside the thoracic cavity decreases, and that is why, to maintain the pressure, the air enters inside our lungs through nostrils. The blood brings carbon dioxide from the rest of the body for release into the alveoli, and the oxygen in the alveolar air is taken up by blood in the alveolar blood vessels to be transported to all the cells in the body. During the breathing cycle, when air is taken in and let out, the lungs always contain a residual volume of air so that there is sufficient time for oxygen to be absorbed and for the carbon dioxide to be released. When the body size of animals is large, the diffusion pressure alone cannot take care of oxygen delivery to all the parts of the body. Instead, respiratory pigments take up oxygen from the air in the lungs and carry it to tissues which are deficient in oxygen before releasing it. In human beings, the respiration pigment is hemoglobin, which has a very high affinity for oxygen. This pigment is present in the red blood corpuscles. Carbon dioxide is more soluble in water than oxygen is, and hence is mostly transported in the dissolved form in our blood. Do you know? If the alveolar surface were spread out, it would cover about 80 meters square. How much do you think the surface area of your body is? Consider how efficient exchange of gases becomes because of the large surface available for the exchange to take place. If diffusion were to move oxygen in our body, it is estimated that it would take 3 years for a molecule of oxygen to get to our toes from our lungs. Aren't you glad that we have hemoglobin? Questions. Number 1. What advantage over an aquatic organism does a terrestrial organism have with regard to obtaining oxygen for respiration? Number 2. What are the different ways in which glucose is oxidized to provide energy in various organisms? How is oxygen and carbon dioxide transported in human beings? Number 4. How are the lungs designed in human beings to maximize the area of exchange of gases? We are done with respiration now. Let's move to transportation. Transportation in human beings. Activity 6.7. Visit a health center in your locality and find out what is the normal range of hemoglobin content in human beings. Is it the same for children and adults? Is there any difference in the hemoglobin levels for men and women? Visit a veterinary clinic in your locality. Find out what is the normal range of hemoglobin content in an animal like the buffalo or cow. Is this content different in calves, male and female animals? Compare the difference seen in male and female human beings and animals. How would the difference, if any, be explained? We have seen in previous sections that blood transports food, oxygen and waste materials in our body. In class 9th, we learnt about blood being a fluid connective tissue. Blood consists of a fluid medium called plasma in which the cells are suspended. Plasma transports food, carbon dioxide and nitrogenous wastes in dissolved form. Oxygen is carried by the red blood cells. Many other substances like salts are also transported by the blood. We thus need a pumping organ to push blood around the body, a network of tubes to reach all the tissues, and a system in place to ensure that this network can be repaired if damaged. Our pump, the heart. The heart is a muscular organ which is as big as our fist. Because both oxygen and carbon dioxide have to be transported by blood, the heart has different chambers to prevent the oxygen-rich blood from mixing with the blood containing carbon dioxide. The carbon dioxide-rich blood has to reach the lungs for the carbon dioxide to be removed, and the oxygenated blood from the lungs has to be brought back to the heart. This oxygen-rich blood is then pumped to the rest of the body. We can follow this process step by step. Oxygen-rich blood from the lungs comes to the thin-walled upper chamber of the heart on the left atrium. The left atrium relaxes when it is collecting this blood. It then contracts while the next chamber, the left ventricle, expands so that the blood is transferred to it. Additional knowledge: the valve between the left atrium and the left ventricle is called mitral valve, which is also known as bicuspid valve. It is called bicuspid because it has two flaps. When the muscular left ventricle contracts in return, the blood is pumped out to the body. Deoxygenated blood comes from the body to the upper chamber on the right atrium as it expands. As the right atrium contracts, the corresponding lower chamber, the right ventricle, dilates. Additional knowledge again that the valve present between the right atrium and right ventricle is known as tricuspid valve. It is called so because it has three flaps. There can be a question that why there are three flaps in the right side and two flaps on the left side. This is because the pressure is high on the left side and low in the right side. That is why there is more chance of backflow on the right side. That is, the blood will come back to the ventricle or the atrium. That is why there are valves to prevent the backflow of blood. This transfers blood to the right ventricle, which in turn pumps it to the lungs for oxygenation. Since ventricles have to pump blood into various organs, they have thicker muscular walls than the atria do. Valves ensure that blood does not flow backwards when the atria or ventricles contract. Oxygen enters the blood in the lungs. The separation of the right side and the left side of the heart is useful to keep oxygenated and deoxygenated blood from mixing. Such separation allows a highly efficient supply of oxygen to the body. This is useful in animals that have high energy needs, such as birds and mammals, which constantly use energy to maintain their body temperature. In animals that do not use energy for this purpose, the body temperature depends on the temperature in the environment. Such animals, like amphibians or many reptiles, have three-chambered hearts and tolerate some mixing of the oxygenated and deoxygenated blood streams. Fishes, on the other hand, have only two chambers to their hearts, and the blood is pumped to the gills, is oxygenated there, and passes directly to the rest of the body. Thus, blood goes only once through the heart in the fish during one cycle passage through the body. On the other hand, it goes through the heart twice during each cycle in other vertebrates. This is known as double circulation. Now, more to know: blood pressure. The force that blood exerts against the wall of a vessel is called blood pressure. This pressure is much greater in arteries than in veins. The pressure of blood inside the artery during ventricular systole contraction is called systolic pressure, and the pressure in artery during ventricular diastole relaxation is called diastolic pressure. The normal systolic pressure is about 120 mm of Hg, that is mercury, and diastolic pressure is 80 mm of Hg, that is mercury again. Blood pressure is measured with an instrument called sphygmomanometer. This question can be there in the board exams. What is the instrument called which measures the blood pressure? So the answer to this is sphygmomanometer. High blood pressure is also called hypertension and is caused by the constriction of arterioles, which result in increased resistance to blood flow. It can lead to the rupture of an artery and internal bleeding, and we all know that how dangerous it is. The tubes, vessels, blood vessels. Arteries are the vessels which carry blood away from the heart to various organs of the body. Since the blood emerges from the heart under high pressure, the arteries have thick, elastic walls. Veins collect the blood from different organs and bring it back to heart. They do not need thick walls because the blood is no longer under pressure. Instead, they have valves that ensure that the blood flows only in one direction. On reaching an organ or tissue, the artery divides into smaller and smaller vessels to bring the blood in contact with all the individual cells. The smallest vessels have walls which are 1 cell thick and are called capillaries. Exchange of material between the blood and surrounding cells takes place across this thin wall. The capillaries then join together to form veins that convey the blood away from the organ or tissue. Now, some additional knowledge. Many students have this doubt that are the arteries or veins the same tube or they are different. So, the answer to this question is that arteries and veins are very different and they are parallel. They run parallel to each other. The arteries divide into capillaries and then the other tube is formed when the capillaries join together. Now, an important question can come in the board exams about differentiate between arteries and veins. So, whatever we just read is the answer to it. Maintenance by platelets. What happens if this system of tubes develops a leak? Think about situations when we are injured and start bleeding. Naturally, the loss of blood from the system has to be minimized. In addition, leakage would lead to a loss of pressure which would reduce the efficiency of the pumping system. To avoid this, the blood has platelet cells which circulate around the body and plug these leaks by helping to clot the blood at these points of injury. Lymph. There is another type of fluid also involved in transportation. This is called lymph or tissue fluid. Additional knowledge. The system in which the lymph is transporting the materials is called lymphatic system. Through the pores present in the walls of capillaries, some amount of plasma, proteins and blood cells escape into intercellular spaces in the tissues to form the tissue fluid or lymph. It is similar to the plasma of blood but colorless and contains less protein. Lymph drains into lymphatic capillaries from the intercellular spaces, which join to form large lymph vessels that finally open into larger veins. Lymph carries digested and absorbed fat from intestine and drains excess fluid from extracellular space back into the blood. Transportation in plants. We have discussed earlier how plants take in simple compounds such as CO2 and photosynthesize energy stored in their chlorophyll containing organs, namely leaves. The other kinds of raw materials needed for building plant bodies will also have to be taken up separately. For example, the soil is the nearest and richest source of raw materials like nitrogen, phosphorus and other minerals. The absorption of these substances therefore occurs through the plant in contact with the soil, namely roots. If the distances between soil contacting organs and chlorophyll containing organs are small, energy and raw materials can easily diffuse to all parts of the plant body. But if these distances become large because of changes in plant body design, diffusion process will not be sufficient to provide raw material in leaves and energy in roots. This was the same as how we cannot use the process of diffusion for transporting oxygen from in our body, which is a multicellular organism's body. A proper system of transportation is therefore essential in such situations. Energy needs differ between different body designs. Plants do not move, and plant bodies have a large proportion of dead cells in many tissues. As a result, plants have low energy needs and can use relatively slow transport system. The distances over which transport systems have to operate, however, can be very large in plants such as very tall trees. Plant transport systems will move energy stores from leaves and raw materials from roots. These two pathways are constructed as independently organized conducting tubes. 1. The xylem moves water and minerals obtained from the soil. The other, phloem, transports products of photosynthesis from the leaves where they are synthesized to other parts of the plant. We have studied the structure of these tissues in detail in class 9th. I would like to add some facts to it, that the transport of water and minerals from roots to the other part to the leaves is called ascent of sap, while the transport of food from through phloem from the leaves to the other parts of the plant is called translocation of solutes. Now let's move with transport of water. In xylem tissue, vessels and tracheids of the roots, stem and leaves are interconnected to form a continuous system of water conducting channels reaching all parts of the plant. At the roots, cells in contact with the soil actively take up ions. This creates a difference in the concentration of these ions between the root and the soil. Water, therefore, moves into the root from the soil to eliminate this difference. This means that there is a steady movement of water into the root xylem, creating a column of water that is steadily pushed upwards. This process is also known as cohesion, adhesion, tension theory, and also known as transpiration pull theory. However, this pressure by itself is unlikely to be enough to move water over the heights that we commonly see in plants. Plants use another strategy to move water in xylem upwards to the highest points of the plant body. Activity 6.8. Take two small pots of approximately the same size and having the same amount of soil. One should have a plant in it. Place a stick of the same height as the plant in the other pot. Cover the soil in both pots with a plastic sheet so that the moisture cannot escape by evaporation. Cover both sets, one with the plant and the other with the stick, with plastic sheets, and place in bright sunlight for half an hour. Do you observe any difference in the two cases? Provided that the plant has an adequate supply of water, the water which is lost through the stomata is replaced by water from the xylem vessels in the leaf. In fact, the evaporation of water molecules from the cells of a leaf create a suction which pulls water from the xylem cell of roots. The loss of water in the form of vapor from the aerial parts of the plant is known as the transpiration. That is why this theory is also known as transpiration pull theory. Thus, transpiration helps in the absorption and upward movement of water and minerals dissolved in it from roots to the leaves. It also helps in temperature regulation. The effect of root pressure in transport of water is more important at night. During the day, when the stomata are open, the transpiration pull becomes the major driving force in the movement of water in the xylem. Now, transport of food and other substances. So far, we have discussed the transport of water and minerals in plants. Now, let us consider how the products of metabolic wastes, particularly photosynthesis, are moved from leaves, where they are formed, to other parts of the plant. Well, I would like to add something. This is explained by Munch hypothesis, according to which the food moves from the source, that is leaves, to the sink, that is all the other parts of the plant which need and which have to utilize the food, or the energy produced. This transport of soluble products of photosynthesis is called translocation, and it occurs in the part of the vascular tissue known as phloem. Besides the products of photosynthesis, the phloem transports amino acids and other substances. These substances are especially delivered to the storage organs of roots, fruits, and seeds, and to growing organs. The translocation of food and other substances takes place in the sieve tubes with the help of adjacent companion cells both in upward and downward direction. Since this is both in upward and downward direction, it is called bidirectional. Unlike transport in xylem, which can be largely explained by simple physical forces, the translocation of phloem is achieved by utilizing energy. Material like sucrose is transferred into phloem tissue using energy from ATP. This increases the osmotic pressure of the tissue, causing water to move into it. This pressure moves the material in the phloem to tissues which have less pressure. This allows the phloem to move material according to the plant's needs. For example, in the spring, sugar stored in root or stem tissue would be transported to the buds which need energy to grow. Questions. Number 1. What are the components of the transport system in human beings? What are the functions of these components? Number 2. Why is it necessary to separate oxygenated and deoxygenated blood in mammals and birds? Number 3. What are the components of the transport system in highly organized plants? Number 4. How are water and minerals transported in plants? Number 5 and the last one, how is food transported in plants? Now, excretion. We have already discussed how organisms get rid of gaseous wastes generated during photosynthesis or respiration. Other metabolic activities generate nitrogenous materials which need to be removed. Yes, we can say that they are nitrogenous wastes. The biological process involved in the removal of these harmful metabolic wastes from the body is called excretion. Different organisms use varied strategies to do this. Many unicellular organisms remove these wastes by simple diffusion from the body surface into the surrounding water. As we have seen in other processes, complex multicellular organisms use specialized organs to perform the same function. Excretion in human beings. The excretory system of human beings includes a pair of kidneys, a pair of ureters, a urinary bladder, and a urethra. Kidneys are located in the abdomen on the either side of the backbone. You must have heard people saying, kidney to peeth mein hoti hai. It is because it is on the either side of the backbone, that is the vertebral column. Urine produced in the kidneys passes through the ureters into the urinary bladder, where it is stored until it is released through the urethra. How is urine produced? The purpose of making urine is to filter out waste products from the blood. Just as CO2 is removed from the blood in the lungs, nitrogenous waste such as urea or uric acid are removed from the blood in the kidneys. It is then no surprise that the basic filtration unit in kidneys, like in the lungs, is a cluster of very thin-walled capillaries, blood capillaries. Each capillary cluster in the kidney is associated with the cup-shaped end of a tube that collects the filtered urine. Each kidney has large numbers of these filtration units called nephrons packed close together. Some substances in the initial filtrate, such as glucose, amino acids, salts, and a major amount of water, are selectively reabsorbed as the urine flows along the tube. The amount of water reabsorbed depends on how much excess water there is in the body and on how much of dissolved waste there is to be excreted. The urine formation in each kidney eventually enters a long tube, the ureter, which connects the kidneys with the urinary bladder. Additional knowledge: the ureters are connected to the urinary bladder obliquely. The reason for this is that so as to prevent the backflow of urine from the urinary bladder to the ureter. Urine is stored in the urinary bladder until the pressure of the expanded bladder leads to the urge to pass it out through the urethra. The bladder is muscular, so it is under nervous control, as we have discussed elsewhere. As a result, we can usually control the urge to urinate. Artificial kidney hemodialysis. Kidneys are vital organs for survival. Several factors like infections, injury, or restricted blood flow to kidneys reduce the activity of kidneys. This leads to accumulation of poisonous wastes in the body, which can even lead to death. In case of kidney failure, an artificial kidney can be used. An artificial kidney is a device to remove nitrogenous waste products from the blood through dialysis. So remember, the artificial kidney is a device and the process is called dialysis. Artificial kidneys contain a number of tubes with a semi-permeable lining suspended in a tank filled with dialyzing fluid. This fluid has the same osmotic pressure as blood, except that it is devoid of nitrogenous wastes. The patient's blood is passed through these tubes. How can the body be passed through tubes? During this passage, the waste products from the blood pass into dialyzing fluid by diffusion. The purified blood is pumped back into the patient. This is similar to the function of the kidney, but it is different since there is no reabsorption involved. There can be a question that a 1 mark question it should be, I think. So the question can be, how is the artificial kidney different from our natural kidneys? So this is the answer to it, that it is different since there is no reabsorption involved. Normally, in a healthy adult, the initial filtrate in the kidneys is about 180 liters daily. However, the volume actually excreted is only a liter or 2 a day, because the remaining filtrate is reabsorbed in the kidney tubules. Now the last topic we have, excretion in plants. So let's just do it and complete the chapter. And yes, just remember to revise excretion, because this is the last topic and we get a little bored after reading the whole chapter, so we don't read it really nicely. That is why just revise it again after this video ends. Excretion in plants. Plants use completely different strategies for excretion than those of animals. Oxygen itself can be thought of as a waste product generated during photosynthesis. We have discussed earlier how plants deal with oxygen as well as CO2. They can get rid of excess water by transpiration. For other wastes, plants use the fact that many of their tissues consists of dead cells, and that they can even lose some parts such as leaves. Many plant waste products are stored in cellular vacuoles. Waste products may be stored in leaves that fall off. Other waste products are stored as resins and gums, especially in old xylem. Plants also excrete some waste substances into the soil around them. Now the last in-text questions. So let's just end this video. Number 1. Describe the structure and functioning of nephrons. Number 2. What are the methods used by plants to get rid of excretory products? Number 3. How is the amount of urine produced regulated? Thank you so much for watching this video. We have completed the chapter. You can now go and have a party because this is such a long chapter. and such a complex chapter, but I love this chapter. And just remember that you have to revise excretion very nicely, because this is something we do at the last, and that is why we do not have much interest to read it. That is why just revise this topic, and thank you so much for watching.